Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sue Halliwell from Composites UK. I'll be moderating this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeepings. All webcams and microphones are off by default. With a large webinar like this with a large number of participants, it makes it run much more smoothly. Any questions that you have, you'll notice if you hover over your control panel bar, there's a Q&A tab. If you can type your questions in there, then once David has finished presenting, we'll take those questions in the order that they come in. You'll have seen this, but there's new guidance that's come out this week. So this webinar, timing of it is very fortuitous. David will be talking through some of that new guidance that's come out and how to apply it to the workplace. So it gives me great pleasure now to hand over to David Butter, who's Principal Inspector of Health and Safety and Head of the General Manufacturing Sector for HSE.
Good afternoon, everybody. I look after the general manufacturing unit within HSE, which basically means my team looks after all manufacturing except for anything with metal or with ceramics and minerals. So that's food, it's wood, it's printing, it's paper, it's board, it's textiles, it's rubber, etc. It's all those sorts of things. And actually, I'm sort of speaking to you here under the banner of safety in manufacturing, plastics and composites. I'm just going to cover some of the very sort of common themes, and then I'm going to move in a little bit more into the issue of social distancing, which is kind of the control measure that most people will be looking to implement or trying to implement or trying to improve on their implementation. So that's where it will guide it towards this. But just really as a bit of reinforcement, we've had lots of people ask us whether if people are off work because of COVID-19, do they have to report that under RIDDLE? And the simple and short answer, if you're in the manufacturing environment, then we very much doubt that you will, because that infection, it's in general society, it's a public health issue, it's not something that's out of arising from the work activity for RIDDLE to apply to that absence from work. But obviously, if you were in the healthcare sector or social care, etc., where you are dealing with people who are known to be carrying the infection, and if that passed on to an employee, then obviously that would be a category in which then it would be RIDDLE reportable. But for pretty much, I can't think of a situation within the manufacturing environment where that would be out of arising solely from the work activity. So pretty much then it's the same as you wouldn't necessarily report a case of somebody was off work with a flu or the cold previously. So that sort of kind of remains the same. And again, the same, the rules on PPE have not changed. As it stands, the guidance, and although I will cover face coverings if you wish me to, if in the Q&A, because that is not, we don't regard that as PPE, that is something completely different. When it comes to personal protective equipment and equipment that meets that definition, so that's things that are CE marked, essentially, then it's our view, it's the government's view, and it's Public Health England's view that is always, it's your last line of defence. You'll have to go through your hierarchy control and your risk assessment, your cost assessment as normal. And if it's specifically for COVID-19 PPE in a manufacturing environment, will not be necessary. That you, if you think about how the disease is transmitted, there's no real requirement for anybody to be wearing PPE for COVID-19 issues. But of course, there may be process issues, there may be a dust or a fume that does need PPE for, and that remains the same. So I think where some things of lines have been blurred in this is, is on advice on face shields and other bits of component which aren't necessarily fit the PPE standards which people are wearing as additional layers, which is fine, but they're not considered PPE. And I said that, as always, if you look at hierarchy control, if can extract it, you can substitute it, extract, etc., then PPE is always the last line, and we would not be expecting in a manufacturing situation for people to be implementing PPE to control transmission. There are other things that you can do, such as social distancing and variations on that, which I'll come to. So just really to clarify, obviously we are aware of some pinch points in the PPE supply chain, in particular FFP and FFP2 face masks. Again, obviously you can't not notice on the news, and obviously the issues, obviously we're ensuring that the NHS is getting its supplies, and I know some businesses have obviously donated theirs to their local NHS as well. But we are starting to see it stabilise a little bit more, and certainly when I've been speaking to the food industry, who do have some situations where there are an FFP and FFP2 in certain situations, flour dust, some food additives, estrogens, etc. Things are actually, they are now able to get supplies, and things are sort of being a little bit more normalised in the sort of, certainly in the FFP3 supply chain now. But obviously we don't, we have no control over that control, other than, you know, we will always make the point is that, you know, in any situation, PPE is always your last line of defence. So this is probably something that is new to us all, something that we hadn't heard of or even thought about prior to the outbreak, and now it's something that's with us wherever we go. Certainly, if we go to the supermarket and we play Pac-Man with our trolleys outside and going around, we are acutely aware of what social distancing is and what it's all about. Now, it's really, some people do understand, and I'll if I'm telling you things you already know, then I'm sorry, but I'm just going to try and go over what social distancing is there for. Once you understand that, that's when I think the things that we come on to a little bit later will make a little bit more sense to you. Social distancing is, and the 2 meters comes out of controlling transmission of the disease. That's what it's there to control. So if we always think of that in the back of our minds, we're standing 2 meters apart from somebody to really cut out the routes of transmission. Those routes of transmission are potentially, if you're talking to someone and there are water droplets that are coming from an infected person, they are normally, and so it won't cover people coughing or sneezing, because I'll go a lot further, but if you're speaking to somebody, then generally, physics of the situation is that those water droplets generally will fall away to the ground within about 1 meter of us. So that stops that form of transmission disease. And the second route is somebody touching a surface or somebody else, and then touching their mouth, their ears, their nose, or their eyes, and transferring that way. And again, 2 meters prevents somebody, you know, shaking hands, etc., and gets rid of that second route of transmission. So 2 meters, social distancing, it's there to prevent transmission. So if we can't do that, then we still have to think in our minds what our alternatives will be to achieve the same goal. It is also different because obviously this is the disease is out in society. It's a public health issue, so it affects us in every part of our lives, including obviously at work. And also it's different where we're used to dealing with specific risks at specific points of a process, or a specific machine, or a specific product. This actually encompasses everything from the minute people arrive at the gates, throughout the day, through the breaks, through the welfare breaks, through to visitors, through to dispatch, through to goods coming in, through to people leaving at the end of the day. It is all encompassing, and it goes across every single part of the business in every single environment of the business. So there are things that people are having to think about which they would not normally think about in their sort of normal everyday aspects of the business. So how do people get to work? And again, the government advice still is people not to use public transport if at all possible. But if they do, Then try and stagger start and finish times, because obviously capacity on public transport will be severely limited. So people will have to get used to queuing at a bus stop to get on a bus. And it may not be able to get on the first one. They may not be able to get on the second one. They may have to wait for the third one. So again, it's for employers to try and be flexible in the start and finish times so that public transport isn't overloaded and social distancing can be maintained. I do know some of the food plants that actually bus people in have their own sort of commercial arrangements. Instead of having one coach, they're now bringing in 3 and 4 so that they can reduce the capacity in each of those to get people in and the same going home again. And again, it's unusual for the government to say that if you've got a car, you're probably best using that, or if you can cycle, if you can walk, again, use those modes of transport as well. But obviously, there are circumstances where some people will have to use public transport again, but just think about those start and travelling times. Again, it comes when people are clocking in, and I'll show you some examples of how to get around that. And the other thing as well is also in those getting people ready for the shop floor, where you may have locker rooms, etc. Again, everybody at shift changeovers everybody may previously have gone in, got them changed, got the lockers, put the safety equipment on, the boots or overalls, etc., and gone into the plant. And again, that may be a much slower process, as it may be a 1 in, 1 out, 2 in, 2 out, whatever the size of your particular facilities are. And again, we've got examples of people putting up marquees, which is okay for the summer months, so they can have some increased capacity and so that people can get people through, they can still socially distance as they're getting into work. And the same, again, is something else that's new, and unless you were perhaps doing stuff for the food industry, involved in the food industry, then having regular cleaning and cleansing of common touch surfaces such as door handles, guardrails, computer keyboards, machine controls, if machines are shared between shifts or different people use that particular touchscreen during the day. Again, it's having that cycle in place and a regime in place, so that again we're cutting out that that route of transmission. And the last thing really is thinking about having as many visual reminders as you can. This is going to take a while to get used to for us all. I think we're slowly getting used to it in the retail sector, but again, they have lots of visual clues. There's the tape on the floor, there are the foot marks, there are the one-way systems that are constant reminding you what 2 meters is and where it is. Now, I have seen some sort of quite sophisticated things where people have got different color carpet, so around a desk or a process that marks the 2 meters out. Some people used hazard tape, some people have used blue crosses, red lines, whatever it happens to be, whatever you've got handy, long as you've got something there to demarcate out those zones, it helps people to comply with the social distancing. And something else that I will always advocate as well is if you can create peer pressure as well, so everybody does their bit, and have somebody going around just simply reminding people, look, that's 2 meters, stand there, because when we get back, or if we continue in the work environment, for those that have carried on, it's very easy for everybody to get back to how things used to be, because we're in a comfortable and a familiar environment. So hence the need for some very strong visual reminders and some vocal reminders at times as well, so that we get used to this. It will take a while, but it's just recognizing that just saying something once probably isn't going to work. Maybe once, twice, 3, 4 times a day, and every day and every week for a while, until we all get used to this new concept when we're at work. So what I'm about to show you, a lot of these have come from the food industry, mainly because the food industry has obviously continued to do things, and with my other hat on in the general manufacturing, that's sort of what I've had access to. This is kindly shared by Greencore, their facility in Boston and Lincolnshire, and it was some of the things that they sort of went through on their thought process when they started to apply a sort of a COVID-19 assessment to the breadth of the business. So this is what I'm talking about. you wouldn't normally expect somebody to do an assessment of the corridor clocking in machines. I don't think I've ever seen one before in a normal risk assessment, but obviously part of COVID-19, this is something they thought about. So they had 2 machines in a narrow corridor, which obviously didn't lend itself, if it was unregulated, to social distancing. So again, a very simple solution for them is they put the blue crosses on the floor, on the floor tiles. And again, you move up 1 cross as the person in front moves on. So again, it gets rid of people bunching and crowding at the start of the shift. Again, then moving up and down corridors, again, simple things that you can do. The one on the left there is just the 2-meter boxes. Again, you're probably used to that if you've gone to the supermarket to queue up with your trolley and once you get into the store. And similarly on the left there, where they've got people walking both directions, again, simple visual reminders. And again, most people, we drive on the left, so if we walk on the left, again, it's just simple things to keep people away. Obviously, it's not, that doesn't look like it's 4 meters wide, but again, thinking about that transmission, if you're coming up to people, you carry on walking, you don't stop and have a chat. So you carry on walking by. So again, that's where your visual reminders there. But again, if you meet somebody, then you either have a single flow rule, or you keep going and you don't stop and have a chat, which you probably usually would have done before all this occurred. The same, again, similar sort of thing they've done here. They've done this outside with the pedestrian route. They've got the protective barrier, yellow barrier there on the left, and they've just then installed one down the middle. So again, they've got a one-way system sort of moving around the factory floor. And again, it's just some simple bits of hazard tape, and obviously that's not going to last forever. So again, it's once when you're looking at your assessment, is then looking at, you've got a maintenance sort of aspect to it, that somebody keeps an eye on those things, because they will get worn over time, and making sure that those things get replaced as and when they're needed to. But when you've got sort of pedestrian walkways, it's quite areas just to box off those 2-meter areas. Similarly, in the canteens, unfortunately, it's going to cause reduced capacity. So again, it's something to think about. Everybody then can't have the break at the same time if you're reducing capacity, unless you, obviously, some companies have put up some additional marquees. They've got additional capacity to maintain the social distancing over the meal breaks, or you use a rota system. Again, this is from Green Corps Boston. Previous situation, if you probably do the maths from that, it's down to probably less than a half, a lot less than that, probably a third of capacity of the canteen area. So rather than having 1 sitting, they may have to now have 3 sittings over a longer period. And again, if it fits with staggered start times, then that may well be a solution for you, but you will obviously have your own sizes of rest areas, etc., to consider. And again, there's an example, a different place there. Obviously, it's taking out the vending machines, but again, simple reminder on where you can sit on those benches, again, to keep social distancing in mind and at the forefront of people's thoughts, even when they're having their breaks. Again, for those that still have smokers amongst the workforce, again, don't forget about the smoking shelter. Again, normally an area where everybody will meet up for 5-10 minutes to have a good chat and a gossip about the football or whatever happens to be going on. Unfortunately, again, it's just putting those visual reminders in to keep people 2 meters away. In this case, you can see there's just the hazard markings there for squares. People have used grids and blocks and all sorts of things. Again, it's what suits you in your workplace. But again, just keep those simple visual reminders so people don't switch off from maintaining the social distancing. And again, this is looking at a production line, and the issue they had there was by increasing the length of the line by an additional 3 meters. They were then able to move some people around and space everybody out, so people were staggered. Nobody was facing each other, and they had, I think they had between 2 and 1.8 meters gap between everybody. And so they was able then to have the staff the line with the same number of people, so they were able to keep the capacity going. But they were in the fortunate position in this particular instance they could extend their production line to cater to give the additional length that they needed. And again, it's also thinking a little bit sort of outside the box as well, as also to consider, again, this is a food example where by going back to the supply chain and asking their customer if they could leave out, I think it was one particular salad leaf out from this recipe, this took 2 people off the line, which meant they could then space everybody out and maintain the 2 meters. And, you know, that was to maintain social distancing. The control measure there was to talk to their customer to say, can we alter our recipe for what we're delivering you? And the supermarket in particular was very good, as you know, the fact that, you know, there wasn't a mixed leaf, it was just one leaf that was in the salad or whatever, doesn't really matter a great deal to them. They cooperated again, but that allowed then the business to carry on, people to be socially distanced by, you know, by changing the recipe of the product that they were actually producing. So quite novel and unique to them. But again, it's that sort of kind of, when you start to do your assessment, is to think about some of these control measures which you wouldn't normally be thinking about. There is an awful lot of guidance out there now. It seems to be changing every day, so it is worth keeping on and on the various websites. I have read the Composites UK one; it's very good, and they've got some very good checklists there as well. I was very impressed with the getting back to work checklist, because again, whilst we all start thinking about COVID-19 and COVID-19 risks, there are still other health and safety risks there that also need to keep your attention as well. We can't swap one for the other. And in particular, if you're bringing bits of plant or areas of the factory that have been mothballed for 6, 7, 8 weeks, then you've got stagnant hot and cold water systems that may well have Legionella developing. You may have some machine fluids, etc. That again may have bacterial growth higher than normal, because obviously we've had some quite warm temperatures as well. So again, think about your normal health and safety risks as well, and as well as dealing with the new risks of COVID-19. We've got a landing page there, which is in the light sort of mauve area, and we've had now literally this week, I think it was Tuesday evening, it came online. We've got the working safely during the coronavirus outbreak microsite, as we call them. That has some links to the .gov website, and that's where we will be hosting most of our sort of COVID-19 related specific guidance. There's 2 pieces on there at the moment, but we're working on other aspects, and that website will be added to as we go along. We've created that just so it keeps it all into one place. And it means then we've got a quicker way of publishing rather than having to go back through our sort of traditional web pages and getting lots of things changed. And this is the sort of landing page for our first one, which has got our sort of generic information on, but also things are different in the devolved nations. So you have to ensure that there aren't any specific aspects to where you are working. So we've got some links there to Scottish and Welsh pages as well. And again, if there is anything specific, we will normally point to that. But it's also worth checking that there is international variation, and your rules are slightly different to somebody else's. So again, this is just some general stuff, how to conduct us, middle reporting, which we've gone through. Hand sanitizer, obviously there was an issue with speeding up production and obviously approval systems, that's what that deals with. face masks and face fit tests. Again, how could people do those during the outbreak? Obviously there is the change of drivers' hours, which is a temporary arrangement. But also, again, we were having reports that delivery drivers were being prevented access to welfare facilities on the basis of COVID-19. Well, no, that's not right. The one thing that you do need to have, and probably is the most important control measure, is good hygiene for everybody, whether that's a visit to your workplace or the people in the workplace. So that was very much the wrong thing to do. So we had to put that on there to remind people that you do need to allow, particularly those visiting lorry drivers, that they can wash their hands and they can comply with good hygiene, the same as everybody else on the plant. There were some issues early doors with examinations and testing, particularly getting access to the insurers coming out. A lot of early days, a lot of the statutory examination inspectors seem to come off the road. We are still working with them because although that's been prioritised to the essential businesses, if places have been mothballed for 6, 7, 8 weeks, there may well be lifting equipment, pressure systems there that were due a thorough examination that hadn't had it. So again, we're working with the various bodies to ensure that that can get completed. Also, a lot of us, and I'm sure most of you, as I am, I'm working from home, and again, it's looking about what's temporary and what arrangements can people make for workstations and IT pieces at home, and then obviously first aid and qualifications again during the outbreak. What I put up now is the new microsite, which is sort of falling in line with the guidance that the Prime Minister spoke about on Sunday and then on Monday evening. And on there, we got the links to those documents, which are themed by environment. So we've got their construction and their outdoor work, factories, plant and warehouses, which I guess most of the audience here will be interested in that one. If you're working in people's homes, if you're working in a lab or research environment, if you work in an office or contact center environment, the hospitalities, retail, and then obviously in vehicles, that's transport and using vehicles to get to work. And then what we've done as well on how to put plans into place, our initial guidance that we put on the website this week are 2 documents, a short guide to working safely. So again, it's very generic, but it gives you a pointers to the areas and the aspects of the business that you need to consider for your risk assessment. And it talks about their, maintaining social distancing, cleansing, and hygiene, and those are the 3 things to keep in mind constantly. And then we also produced a talking toolkit. This aligns quite closely to the stress talking toolkit, which has been on our website for quite a while now. So if any of you have used that, you may see the similarities in the COVID-19 one. But again, that's there to allow employers and employees to have that a guided conversation, because obviously there will be anxieties for people returning to work, and it's just a way of and a framework for talking through those issues, and a way then for people to understand the measures that you put in to ensure that obviously people can work safely during this outbreak. These are what they look like. One on the left is obviously a short guide, and it is a short guide. It's about 8 or 9 pages. Obviously the talking toolkit takes a little bit longer to go through. And this is the guidance that's now, was issued on Monday evening. The one on the left there is probably the one that's of most interest to everybody this afternoon. And that's the one in factories, plants and warehouses. And it's something you may have heard about. And again, it's something that the government is encouraging business to do. Is once you've done your risk assessment, you've put your control measures in place. It's then to sign that and put that poster up so that everybody knows that you've gone through all those processes and you've made your workplace COVID-19 secure. And again, that's something that's visible, so that people know that you've gone through those steps. And again, you can download that when you click on the link to either download the guidance. You can also download that poster. That's sort of a very sort of quick run through. So I'll hand back. I think I'll hand that back to Sue. We can talk through any questions that people have.
Right, okay, so we'll take the questions as they've come in. Thank you very much for that, David. So just to confirm, the slides will be made available to attendees, and we are also recording webinars, so you'll be sent a link to listen to this again if needed. Someone's asked you to run through the PPE status, David.
Yeah.
You did cover that, but
yeah, we are not, unless you're in the sort of healthcare sector, where you are dealing with known COVID-19 positive patients, and you are dealing in a personal care aspect, we are not recommending that anybody implements PPE to control transmission at work. And so in a manufacturing environment, we are not expecting people to implement PPE to control the transmission. The primary ways of doing that are the 2 meters social distancing, and it is the hygiene, the hand washing, and also the cleansing and sanitation of common touch areas. So machine keyboards, handrails, door handles, those things that multiple people will come into contact with, and having a cleaning regime in those. Those pretty much. And if you speak to the Public Health England, they will talk to you about hygiene as being the main way of controlling transmission. So the 2 meters, again, if you can't achieve that, can you achieve something that's equally effective? And you can. We have people are using perspex or plexiglass screens if the actual dimensions of the production area doesn't allow 2 meters. But again, if you put that petition in, it serves 2 purposes. If we think about what 2 meters is there for, it's preventing the droplets going from one person to another, and also preventing somebody touching and transmitting that way. Then a screen will do exactly the same. But again, please don't make them out of cardboard or bits of wood, because you can't clean them. And again, you're not stopping the transmission, you're just storing it on those surfaces. Again, people can work back to back, people can stagger across. It's for you to look in the, when you do your risk assessment, it's to look at, I can't do 2 meters, but I can do something else that's equally effective, and put your reasons down and then implement those controls.
and kind of related to this as well, the question around what extra PPE would be required to protect a first aider if they're treating someone.
I think that I should look this up, because I've had this question before, but I think it's on the, is it on the St John's ambulance?
It is, yes.
Yeah, there is guidance on that. Yeah, I knew there's something I should have read. I do apologise for that.
There's a link to that website from the Composites UK COVID-19 webpage that's focused around health and safety issues. So it's operating safely through COVID-19. There's a link on there to the St John's Ambulance website. There's a couple of questions now. One, both relating to if someone catches COVID-19 at work, or starts displaying symptoms, what should you do within the workplace, and is the employee accountable for that? Or
it'd be very difficult to give it. It would depend on the situation. Basically, this is nothing new. If people are symptomatic, i.e. they have a new dry and persistent cough, or they have a new high temperature, then they should not be turning up at work. They shouldn't be going anywhere. And Public Health England have been very clear on that for a while, nor should anybody from that household be going anywhere either. I think you would talk to, if that happens, that somebody falls ill at work, and they may well do. Again, then again, you probably have to look at doing some cleansing that area where they work, and this is where sort of your risk assessment and your contingencies come in. That you keep your cohorts and groups together, so that we've spoken about. I think we've sort of spoken about the social bubble. If you think about sort of work colleagues, so they work in bubbles, so you try and keep those bubbles as small as possible, so that if you do have a situation where somebody then later develops symptoms who could have been symptomatic but not displaying any of the symptoms whilst they've been at work, then you can easily, those people that have been in contact with can easily be traced, and again they can isolate, and obviously the testing and everything is being ramped up all the time. And again, I think there is Public Health England advice on people should stay at home. There'll be a number of days, and if they then don't develop the symptoms, obviously then they can return to work. If they do then develop the symptoms, obviously then they call the 111 number, and then things are activated in that way. So I think that's something to think about whilst you're doing your risk assessment. Also think about your contingencies, and I say small groups, keeping people together, not having people mixing around. Then if something does happen, you can contain it much more. You can contain it more easily.
Okay, there don't seem to be any more questions. Someone's asked about temperature checking equipment. Do operatives to use this require specific training?
I'm guessing this is talking about temperature checking as people come to work.
Yes, I imagine so.
I have no idea, other than again, it's not the science behind this, and I know airports are thinking of doing it, and I know one or two of the larger I think one or two of the larger logistics companies are using it. Again, it's if you've got a temperature, then I think people would normally know. So relying on that, yes, it's good reassurance, and I think it's good for confidence. Employee and customer confidence, but as a being an actual detecting method, it's not really the thing that you would rely on. It's nice to have, and if people wish to do it. Okay, I don't know enough about the technology. I'm sure, like with most things, is the sensors that it will require calibration. I'm sure it will require ongoing calibration to ensure that it is recording the temperatures correctly. I've not seen that. I've not had any exposure to it, other than when I've asked about the science behind it and how useful it is. It's there if you want to use it, but it's not as reliable as people may think.
Okay. There was an answer that's been typed to say that
yes,
there is specific training required, so that I guess it's so that you can make sure that the equipment's actually being used properly, and also, like you've already said, David, that it's maintained properly.
Yeah.
Okay, another question just come in. Should employees that travel to work to external facilities and need to stay overnight in a hotel on a company business carry out a risk assessment for their accommodation?
I mean, I think, I'm not sure many what external facilities are open at the moment, but again, the first thing would be is that trip essential? In the first place, what are you traveling to that facility for, and do you need to travel in the first place? So that's kind of, as I said, think about your hierarchy of control. Do you need to be there? Why do you need to be in person? As we're all sitting here, we're all doing this by by an IT link. If it is deemed essential and it's deemed necessary, then again, I think you would have to look at the situation as to where people are staying. And I'm not sure that within the hospitality industry, you'd have to speak to whoever the provider was to ask them what their controls are. So, if what they do after it's been occupied, what the occupancy rates, what their cleansing arrangements are, and can they guarantee to you that if one of your employees was using that and having to use it because of work, that again, that they've done their bit so that you can do your bit in the fact that you've done all that's reasonably practicable. But before going down that route, first question would be, why are they traveling and why do they need to stay overnight in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, there's a slightly related question just come in as well. Can you travel to other company sites that are under your control but not in your region? Again, basically the guidelines are that, only do the essential travel. Again, why are you traveling to your sister site? What are you going to do? Again, if it's to do a briefing, then you can do a briefing. You can appear on a video screen or use a telephone. But obviously, there may be again, it's making sure that you definitely do need to visit the site. I don't think nothing is, as far as I'm aware, would stop people doing that. But certainly the current assessments and things that I've got, companies are saying we're only traveling between sites if it's essential. And again, the point being is they're trying to reduce any additional routes of transmission, again, keeping those populations as tight as possible. And it's sort of part of their contingency as well. So again, ask the question, do I need to? And if you do need to, there's nothing to prevent you doing that. Okay. That's great. Well, we don't seem to have any other questions coming in. Every time I say that, another one pops up. Should there be a COVID-19 fire drill?
Well, it should be. There should be. Again, it's there are other health and safety risks are still there. So everything shouldn't. Although we've got to concentrate on COVID-19, we also need to keep in mind the other things. Again, I think we had a question last time about if you do a drill evacuation, again, you've got to socially distance if it's just a drill, it's not the real thing, then I would suggest, why are you carrying it out? For what purpose? If you've got something that's within time, are you introducing, just for the sake of a drill? Then if you're going to do that, you're probably going to have to manage it a bit more closely than you would a traditional drill, i.e. ensure that where people go, that they can social distance and probably have some more fire marshals outside to remind people to social distance when they get out. But obviously, if there's a real fire, then people will let's look at what's the greater risk in an emergency situation. So I think we have to be sensible in that. But again, if you're going to just solely do a drill, then again, just think about if you need to do one. If you do, then manage it a little bit more careful than before.
Okay. Another question come in around PPE, saying, does this mean you can't use it as a last line of control in manufacturing?
No, you can, but it is it's the last line of defence, and again, it's going through that hierarchy. What we'd expect people to do is to go through your elimination or your substitution, your physical controls, your administrative controls, and if all of those we still can't control it, and we've still got somebody exposed to a risk, and then yes, you can still use PPE. We're not. That hasn't changed. What we are not expecting people to do is to use PPE in manufacturing to control transmission of COVID-19. We're expecting that to be done by social distancing, good hygiene, and good sanitation. But obviously, there will still be process risks for which PPE is required, and that remains the same.
Okay. And related to that, is PPE okay for engineers who have to work close together?
Again, is to look at what those jobs are. And again, duration is key here. Does it need 2 people? And if it needs to communicate, can somebody be, have a radio or something and stand away if it's, if you need a second opinion? Again, just think about that particular job. And again, if you're working in close environments, make sure you're not working face to face. You're working side to side or back to back, and just think about what you can do to prevent transmission in that situation. It may take a little bit of job design, but again, you've got to, robustly say, we definitely need 2 people, and why you need 2 people. And then again, what are all your mitigating actions you're going to take? So it's a very generic question, that for which I'm sure there's some very specific situations with some very specific controls. So I'd say, again, do that robust first line question: why do we need 2 people?
Yeah. Okay, we've not had any other questions come in, so we'll bring the webinar to a close. If you do have questions following the webinar, please either contact your contacts at BPF or Composites UK, and we'll, if we don't know the answers, we'll get in touch with David and find out the answer for you. Graham from BPF has just asked about the COVID-19 risk assessments. Does this have to be published? I think the guidance says if you've got more than 50 employees, then the government expect you to publish it, don't they?
Yeah, that's come from BASE. That's not something from us. But yes, I have seen that. Again, and the other item is that poster. There is nothing in HS. There's nothing in our legislation that has changed. Obviously, it remains the same, that if you've got more than 5 employees, your assessments have to be written down. That's the same. That's a recommendation from the government and from BASE for companies to do that. So again, if you have a website, that's what they've recommended that you do. It's not something that HSE would be enforcing, if that's the question.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, as I said, if you do have questions that come up after the webinar, please get in touch with either BPF or Composites UK, and we will try to answer those questions. If we don't know the answer, we'll get in touch with David and get HSE guidance on the answers that we provide. I know BPF and Composites UK both have extensive guidance and information on their websites that is specific for our sectors, and there's a wealth of information that David's already gone through today that's available now through HSE and through the government website as well. So yeah, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for your participation. Thank you for your questions, and thank you very much, David, for your presentation this afternoon.